We talk to the legends of the creative and entertainment industries. We talk to those on the rise. Lance Dean Anthony Nielsen asks about the highs, the lows, and everything in between. This is Outcast Creative, and this is Industry Interviews.
Hello, welcome to another industry interview. I only just did one yesterday. We've got another one today. Very exciting guest. This is industry interview 115. So well on our way to hitting my target of 150 by the end of this year, if we can manage it. So as you know, we don't just interview actors, writers, directors, musicians, board games designers. We also interview authors, people that have written books, particularly books that I find interesting, that I think I've got something to say about, or books that I think people that will watch my channel or subscribers of my channel will be interested in reading. And people will know that I'm a massive World War II guy. Now, behind me here might be things like the Lego Death Star and Thunderbird 3 and some X-Wings and whatnot. But if you go into my other room, you will see that it is wall-to-wall World War II tanks, particularly 1944 Western Front. I've got everything in there from Tigers to Panthers and everything in between. In fact, you know what? If I'd thought this through, I would have had some here so I could have popped them up in front of the telly. Anyway, but yeah, I'm a massive World War II guy. I've got a huge collection of World War II miniature figures in 10mm, 132nd and 20mm, including the 101st Airborne and 82nd Airborne, of course, both of whom played vital roles in the Battle of the Bulge. And it's funnily enough, the Battle of the Bulge is the topic of the book that we're going to be talking about today, the book of which is called Jeep Show, which I'm going to show you quickly here. The link, by the way, for this is in the information at the bottom. I have been reading through this book today, and I have to say I'm very impressed, and it's also about a particularly interesting topic. And as I work in the creative entertainment industry, this is the story of a particular Jeep show, which is a true unit that went around entertaining the soldiers that were very close to the front line. So you'd have a Jeep with a driver and several entertainers on board, and this included the likes of actors like Mickey Rooney and others who would go to the front line of the American troops and do little skits, do little comedy shows for them, sometimes pull soldiers out from the audience and do that kind of thing. My co-host tonight is a fan of historical fiction, another massive World War II guy. He also appeared in every episode of Band of Brothers and worked on it, and that's the Inside Man. Welcome back to the channel, sir. I knew this would be of interest to you because you're a big World War II guy.
Oh, huge. And yeah, this is of enormous interest to me.
Yeah, and these entertainment units provided an absolutely vital role in World War II. In fact, I would say that this novel is begging to have a movie made about it. And historical fiction is a genre of books that I'm fascinated in because I've written a few novels. One of them you could call historical fiction in a sense. So let's get our guest author in to talk about it. None other than writer Robert B. O'Connor. Thank you very much for giving us your time tonight, Robert, to come in and talk about your book. I'm so glad you were recommended to me when somebody said, you're going to want to talk to this guy. He's an author. And I am being contacted by quite a lot of authors at the moment. And I said, what's the book about? And they said, well, it's set during Battle of the Bulge. I was all ears. So,
well, very
welcome.
Good. Good evening to both of you gentlemen. I'm really pleased to be here, and it's always a pleasure to talk to people that are knowledgeable and interested in World War II. I'm something of a subject expert about a very small sliver of it, but I'm pleased that, and it's a sliver that almost no one knows about.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. What I always do with my guests is I have a series of quick fire questions just to get a sense of what your own cultural things were that hit you when you were growing up.
Sure.
And the first question I always ask every guest is, what big movie did you first see on the silver screen when you were a kid? What was that first movie you got taken to see by your parents, or you bunked off school?
It was the Mary Poppins with Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke, and my family moved actually right into New York City in the early 1960s. So I saw it at Radio City Music Hall, which only added to it absolutely knocked me flat.
That must have been incredible, because I mean, yeah, I mean, they're not screening movies there anymore, I don't think.
Right. Yeah, they were, and the Rockettes danced before the movie, so it was quite a show.
Damn. I mean, that's a way to see a movie, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. And my parents sobered up, and we moved out of Manhattan a few years later, but it was great while it lasted.
It's interesting because film producer Gail Ann Hurd, or we've lost Gary for a second, it's probably his connection, he'll be back shortly. Film producer Gail Ann Hurd, who produced Terminator and Terminator 2 and Aliens and also the Walking Dead franchise, she's been on this channel, and that was her same answer. Her first film was also Mary Poppins. Do you know what the last film is that you went to see at the cinema that you paid for a ticket for?
Well, you're going to realize that I watch most of my films on my computer or television. Sure. The last one my wife and I went to was the brilliant film Fallen Leaves by Aki Kaurismäki, if I can say that right, Kaurismäki, the Finnish director. It was minimalist and so human, and I just absolutely loved it. So it made a huge impression on me. What
would you say for you has been a groundbreaking TV show since the year 97, so post Sopranos, that came out that you had to watch every episode? That was it, defining.
Well, of course, Breaking Bad. You know, everybody in America who watched one episode got hooked on Breaking Bad. And in fact, I have waited a long time to watch Better Call Saul. And now, you know, my wife and I having to resist not to binge it, 4 hours at a time.
Yeah, that's quite hard. Quite hard to do that.
Right. So yeah, I would say Breaking Bad. I spent many years working at and then owning an advertising agency. So the very successful, somewhat groundbreaking miniseries, whose name I cannot remember at the moment. I must be a little nervous, Lance.
That's all right.
The very successful miniseries about life at an ad agency.
Is it Ad Men or Mad Men or
Mad Men? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And it was one of those things. And of course, as a director, you're familiar with this challenge. The first 2 seasons were absolutely magical, brilliant. And then I think it went for 4, and it just fell off for me after the first 2. And of course, I had some inside perspective since I'd worked for many years at an ad agency. Sure. And, that was something that Breaking Bad did not do. For me, it absolutely did not fall off after the first 2 years. But yeah, Mad Men was another very influential one for me.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot on the channel, and I'm always saying to people, my favorite one under that category is The Shield with Michael Chiklis, about the corrupt cops in Los Angeles, which was kind of written on the fallout of the Rampart scandal. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. The entire show of 7 seasons is currently available on Amazon.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Definitely strongly recommend that. Moving a few quick fire questions, slightly more in your milieu of skill sets.
Sure.
What was the first novel you ever remember picking up and reading when you in your youth?
Frank Oz, who wrote the very successful and famous Wizard of Oz novel. It is less known that he went on to write about 12 sequels.
Right.
So and to a 9-year-old who had plenty of time to read, I just tore through Wizard of Oz and then all those increasingly fantastical sequels, and just absolutely got lost in them.
Yeah, that's interesting because my first book was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, closely followed by The Hobbit. So I think we were both in similar territory there. Can you recall what the last novel was that you read?
Well, to help me with my writing, there's 3 or 4 novels I read over and over and over again. One is, so any one of these 4, one is Huckleberry Finn, the great American novel. Another is A Perfect Spy by John le Carré, the British writer, which is an absolutely brilliant father-son spy story. Absolutely brilliant.
Sure.
And I just read The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood, which has a novel within the novel. So it's one of those 3, and I read them over and over because it's like university for a writer.
I think you're right. I think it's very important for writers to read other books and not necessarily copy or emulate styles, but just explore the ways that writers approach narrative. I think is very useful. You know, and I think probably the first adult book that I read that really gripped me was Tom Clancy's Hunt for October.
Oh, yes.
I found it the other day in its battered condition. Here it is, and I've kept it out because I've said to myself, I will read it again. It's very, you can see the pages are very faded and as a good book should be. So I remember
reading Red Star Rising.
I've got
one of his absolute pot boilers, and I remember sitting outside my infant son's bedroom because he kept getting out of bed every 10 minutes. And I kept having to shepherd him back into bed, and I passed the time reading that book, and it was, I was very happy to sit there.
That's interesting. Red Storm Rising is one of his I would actually like to see adapted into a mini series. You could quite easily set that with the things that are going on right now.
Absolutely. It was pre-drones, of course, and it was pre-drones, but yes, it had a lot of authenticity to it.
So was there a moment in your life when, because they say everybody's got one good book in them, what was the moment for you where you decided to put pen to paper, so to speak? Was there a key teacher maybe that nudged you in that direction? Or
it was, I had written a lot of advertising copy and business writing, so I had plenty of experience, and I think I was born with a modest, and let me emphasize, modest gift for writing. But I first put pen to paper to write a book during a month-long period of severe depression. And it's funny, it lasted exactly a month. I was so depressed that even though I had to go to work because I owned an ad agency, I couldn't do any work. So I sat there at my desk and just journaled about my situation and related things. And on day 31, I woke up and I was completely better. And I thought I would take that journal and turn it into essentially a self-help nonfiction book, which I did in several years. So that's what made me a book writer, was that experience, surviving it, and trying to turn my thinking from it into something that would help other people.
I mean, that's really interesting because I'm just about to finish a book that's about how going back to dancing helped me cope with my PTSD diagnosis, which I had a couple of years ago. And you basically did the same thing, albeit slightly differently, to tackle your depression. I mean, without getting too much into your private life, was there a particular event that was the source of that depression, or was it just something that hit you out of nowhere?
It was the culmination of death of both parents, death of a beloved cousin and friend, 2 divorces, and business damn near bankruptcy over, within about the same I don't know, 18-month period. And
Yeah.
I just woke up one morning and I was just I was just borderline helpless. And again, as I say, I feel lucky because some people feel like that every day their whole life. Whereas, and I got some help from counseling and pharmaceuticals and friends. And, I had much support. And then on, day 31, I woke up like, wow, I'm better. And so I wouldn't want to go through it again, but
No.
I don't know that I'd want to give up what happened and what I became as a result. I don't recommend it, by the way.
No, but I mean, as you say, kind of out of that, going through that fire made you a tougher person, and perhaps also enabled you to tap into an even stronger vein of creativity that was sort of dormant but waiting to explode, perhaps.
Absolutely. And Lance, it made me significantly more empathetic, which obviously is a good thing in life overall, but is also very important in writing characters. Even especially flawed characters, which most characters are. So yes, that's what turned me to writing books. So I wrote this nonfiction book because, of course, my writing experience in advertising and other business was nonfiction for the most part. And then after that, I decided to turn my hand to fiction.
So you did your self-help book. Now, when you did, was that published by yourself on Amazon? Did you have a publisher? What was your approach to that?
My approach was to self-publish because I didn't want to wait 2 years to get the agent and the publisher, and then secondly, Lance, my trade is marketing,
right?
And when you have a small, and I probably would have not had a large publisher, it probably would have been a small press. And at least in the United States, when your book is published by a small press, you end up having to do all the marketing yourself anyways. Yeah. So I thought, since, A, I don't want to wait 2 years, and then B, I'd have to do the marketing anyways, and it is my trade. So I went ahead and published it, and I have a subchapter S corporation to stick the expenses on. So I did that, and it actually did quite well. I sold about 6,000 copies of it, and possibly Lance even broke even. Or not completely.
Look, for a first self-published book, I think that's always that's a reputable goal to achieve for sure.
Yeah,
I think Inside Man has restored his communications. Excellent. Did you have trouble with your reception there, Gary? I know you had some problems with your computer, so.
Yeah, just the internet just quickly went down. So
yeah, that's right.
Sorry about
that. I figured that was the case, as the clouds have gone dark over here. So when the weather's bad, I know you always get cut off. So we're just talking. We've done our quick fire questions, and we're just getting into Robert's first books. So after you've done the self-help book, that's when you then moved into the realm of fiction. Did you go straight into historical fiction, or what was up first?
Well, I found my way there. I was actually researching a book on something called the Oxydol Circus. I started my career at Procter & Gamble, and the Oxydol Circus is kind of a legend there. That's a subject of another podcast, other than to say the Oxydol detergent brand sponsored a circus in 1968, which turned out to be a disaster, hilarious only in retrospect. I was interviewing for research purposes the daughter of the promoter of the circus that that sold the idea to Oxydol. And she told me all about her father's career in the circus. And then she said, by the way, you probably don't know this, but my father was an enlisted entertainer in World War II. He was in Mickey Rooney's squad, and Mickey Rooney, he and one other entertainer did Jeep shows for frontline infantry in places where the USO or ENSA, if it was British troops, could not go. And I said, no, tell me, please tell me about that.
This is Jim Hetzer's daughter you're talking
Yes,
about.
this is Jim Hetzer's daughter, the later in his career circus promoter. And then she said, and by the way, his older sister, my Aunt Mabel, saved every letter he wrote home from training camp, from England, from France, and from the European Theater of Operations. So I immediately switched my focus to enlisted entertainers in World War II, and particularly this individual. I decided to write fiction because I wanted to write fiction, and secondly, I wanted to involve the main character, who's inspired by Jim Hetzer. I wanted to involve him in a couple of other fundamental things that happened during the war in the European theater. One was, of course, the Battle of the Bulge, as you mentioned, Lance, and then the others were the liberation of a concentration camp, a significant experience for many British, American, and of course Russian soldiers towards the end of the war, and then the occupied Germany. There were so many American soldiers over in Europe that it took 2 years to bring them all back, and many of them, while I waited to come back, ended up doing duty in occupied Germany. So I wanted to add those three things to the story, and thus turned it into fiction.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, I think the that like you say, we could talk about the circus thing. We could do a whole other podcast
right
on that. And Jim Hetzer sounds like quite the character. The Oxydol Circus is a movie waiting to happen by the sound. Some sort of comedy disaster film waiting to happen.
Yes.
But that's so interesting that you were researching one topic, and then the daughter happens to mention, hey, he traveled around with Mickey Rooney in a kind of entertainment jeep in World War II. And I bet your ears kind of went, ding.
Oh,
that sounds interesting. Tell me more.
And, some of your listeners may not know, but Mickey Rooney was the #1 worldwide box office star in 1939. Yeah. And still very, very powerful star, Hollywood star into the early 40s. So the fact that he signed up for service in the European Theater of Operations and then dangerous service in the European Theater of Operations is a real testimony to his patriotism and risk tolerance, to be plain. Very fascinating person. So yes, I then got on this story, and Lance, I have talked to several historians who specialize in World War II, and many people like you who are just deeply interested in it. And I have yet to find anyone that was aware of these enlisted entertainers in the U.S. Army terminology, military occupation specialty 442.
I did know that Mickey Rooney was on the front lines entertaining. I didn't know the designation or the name of his unit, but I had heard that story before.
Yes. Do
so
you know
one?
Do you know? Yes, this is the first one. Do you know Mel Brooks and Sammy Davis Jr., Burt Lancaster, Dick Van Dyke, Bob Fosse, Burl Ives, Don Knotts, Joey Bishop? All of these people, all of these men were MOS 442's enlisted entertainers doing these kinds of activities. Other than Mickey Rooney, the rest of them were complete unknowns, 19 years old or 21 years old. But several of these enlisted entertainers went on to stardom, of course, and brilliant careers in entertainment.
Yeah, because when I was quite young, I remember I think it was a Boxing Day, probably around 1977 or 76, something like that, around my grandparents. And it was after dinner, and there was a movie on, and it was called "It's a Mad, 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 Mad World." I don't know if you remember the film.
I do remember it.
Great classic film. I mean, it's still a
Great.
great movie. I do love the scene where they're trying to work out how to divide the shares of the loot that they haven't found yet, while they're all talking by their cars. But if I remember rightly, I think both Mickey Rooney and Don Knotts are both in that movie. I'm pretty sure they're both in it. And I watched that film again recently because I wrote about it. And one of the things I really noticed about that film is it's the last time that a lot of people from that era of Hollywood are in one movie together. It's very much a passing of the chalice movie. And that is very much the old school Hollywood of the 50s and 60s are kind of on their way out in Phil Silvers and the like.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, imagine the conversation that Don Knotts and Mickey Rooney probably had offset, while they're eating lunch or dinner about their experiences driving around in a Jeep on the German border.
Because, going back to your book, Mickey Rooney does appear in it. He's there. I've got this. Well, we don't want to show people that. We want them to buy it. But and here's a pitch. This is Jim Hetzer, I believe.
That is Jim Hetzer. That's one of his photographs. He was not successful in trying to break into show business as a performer. He and his wife spent a couple of years in New York trying to break in. His wife was significantly more talented than he was, and he was not successful and retreated back to West Virginia, was a dance teacher, and then at the ripe age of 29, volunteered for the U.S. Army in 1943. He did not have to. He would not have been drafted because he had a young child. So that is Jim Hetzer during his trying to make it years.
I think back then, especially, I don't think anyone of that time really wanted to be the guy in their town who, for whatever reason, wasn't the one who served.
Very, very good point. Yes, absolutely. There was first of all, the America was much more patriotic then than it is now, because it was full of children of immigrants who had come from very bad places and found not only refuge, but freedom and economic opportunity in America. So these were children of people who were truly grateful for America. Yeah. And then, there was just an incredible amount of peer pressure to join up. In fact, Mickey Rooney did finally join in 1943, and basically he felt he had to. Celebrities of his age were under tremendous pressure to join. So yes, now older men with children, not so much, but many did, and Jim Hetzer certainly did.
So tell us, so your book, Jeep Show, is essentially it's historical fiction, which is quite a good selling genre these days. And I've got another friend who writes a lot of books set during the time of the Roman Empire. And he tries to keep them very much in what we know was the existing narrative, which of course is very much up for debate, especially if you watch the Australian series of Spartacus, which we've done a big detailed breakdown of on this show. Tell the people watching and the people that will watch this later, tell us about the 442 and the Jeep Show unit and the role that they played. Just give us an insight into the narrative you're tapping, your story and your characters, the world they inhabit, as it were.
The leaders of the armed forces were very, very concerned about the morale of their soldiers, both in terms of the morale of their soldiers in training camps to keep the soldiers from going out and getting arrested, possibly out of boredom, and then for the soldiers overseas, they were again very interested in morale. They they in memos they quoted the famous line from Napoleon, morale is to the material as 3 is to 1. So the Army had until 1943, it was called the Morale Corps. And it was literally the soldiers in the Morale Corps, their job was various programs related to morale, entertainment of the soldiers. So there were movies, there were special armed forces editions of books that were printed in an unusual way, so they fit into the pocket of the combat jackets that the soldiers wore. There was athletic equipment. Several 100,000 baseballs were shipped to troops. But then there was this small group of soldiers who were entertainment specialists, and they had 2 jobs. Their first job in the rear, when they were in the rear echelon, was to organize what were called soldier shows. And these were shows where soldiers would be the cast and the crew. So the idea was, to give soldiers in the rear echelon something to do. The other thing they were tasked to do was Jeep shows. And that came from a very famous Broadway producer by the name of Joshua Logan. And Joshua Logan directed, I should say director, not producer. Sorry, Lance. Joshua Logan directed South Pacific and Annie Get Your Gun and Mr. Roberts and Camelot. Well, he was a captain in the Morale Corps, which was actually called Special Services by 1944. And he realized the Allies had moved, the Americans and the British had moved so far, so fast after D-Day and after the breakout in Normandy that they were literally on the German border by September. And they had outmoved their supplies, and they had outmoved any chance of entertainment from movies or USO shows, other things like that. So Joshua Logan decided to organize these enlisted entertainers who, by the way, at that point were in Paris doing one big show for audiences, servicemen in Paris, pretty good duty. He closed that show down and organized them in groups of 3 and assigned a driver to them, and then assigned them to do Jeep shows up just behind the front line. So frontline combat infantry would come back half a mile or a mile from the front, probably get a hot meal, possibly a uniform exchange, and they would get a Jeep show. The Jeep shows this was within artillery range, possibly even within sniper range. And these shows were essentially, as you were saying earlier, Lance, the shows were basically derived from vaudeville. So there'd be comedy, a 2-man back and forth comedy, and there would be one of the entertainers would almost always have an instrument, an accordion or a guitar. So there'd be singing, and they would, of course, if it was Mickey Rooney's Jeep show, he would do impressions. Mickey Rooney was an entertainment genius, and one of the many things he did very well was impressions of celebrities of the day. And as you said, one of the highlights, they would always try to pull a soldier out of the audience. There'd be, somewhere between 20 and 50 soldiers, usually a company size at the most. And they'd ask, they say, who's got some talent? And they'd say, yeah, Joe does. So they'd pull Joe out of the audience, and Joe would do terrible impressions, or, he might be a brilliant singer. And that was always a highlight. And then after the show, they would hang around, sign autographs, and just be present. And one of the key points that I learned about morale is, and I learned this from reading a book about ENSA, the British, the British USO, is an ENSA performer who was actually a civilian who had served in the Great War, but was a civilian in World War II. An ENSA performer was interviewed, and he had done shows in Libya and other far-flung places. And he said, you take a boy who's, the farthest away from home he's been is to Blackpool for a donkey ride, and you stick him in Libya 100 miles from, at an oil well in Libya, 100 miles from anybody else. And when we go to do an ENSA show for him, the show is important, but it's really the tea and the biscuits and the natter after the show, and just the being present, being present in these far-flung or isolated places. And if you're guarding an oil well in Libya in World War II, you're isolated physically. Yeah. And if you're frontline combat anywhere, you're very isolated, not only physically, but also, the support troops don't hang around with you very long. So you and your buddies are by yourselves, isolated. So that was really an important point for me, was the being present. And, I've related it to my own life. And, if you have a mate who's gone through something terrible and you want to support him, he's really not interested in all your great advice, but, take him to the pub, play a hand of cards with him, just be present. Yeah. And listen, that's 99% of the help we can do, is just showing up.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm glad that you mentioned ENSA. Actually, I mean, for anyone listening, ENSA is the British version of the USO. So it's the Entertainment National Service Association, I think it is.
Yeah.
As portrayed in that historically factual correct, it ain't half hot, mum.
Oh yeah.
Yes, every night, ENSA, every night something awful was also the joke.
That's exactly every night something awful. But it's but you're right. I mean, this is a kind of a glue, isn't it? These kind of entertainment programs were a glue that really kind of linked these very, very young men, these young boys, with their home. This was the thread that gave them that link, that they, it enabled them to realize that those threads weren't broken, that those threads were still there. So they still had that huge connection, regardless of which part of the world they were in. And it's funny that you mentioned Libya, actually. There's I don't know whether, and I'm sure you do know about the cartoon strip Jane. I think she was published in the Daily Express, and she was a kind of a glamour girl. So it was just a small cartoon strip on a daily basis. So and they said that there was this famous piece of propaganda that every time she lost her clothes, the British Army advanced another 20 miles to North Africa. So the Daily Express would make sure that this comic strip girl would lose her clothes pretty much every single day. So
that's absolutely, I wish I had known that before I wrote the book.
It's
I can see that's a segue to a good comical moment. That's a good time to ask you this. Because historical fiction, you can't just write a book set in Paris in 1943 and hope for the best. You've got to immerse yourself in that world. What research did you do when approaching this book, and how much of it did you do before you started putting pen to paper and thinking about what the structure of this book was going to be? What were the first breadcrumbs?
I certainly did too much research before I started planning the book.
There's a lot of Battle of the Bulge books out there.
That and I read most of them. And actually, since I was, that was more on target, but I became vastly fascinated with vaudeville, and I became vastly fascinated with American evangelicals, particularly Billy Sunday, a very famous American evangelical, and I became vastly fascinated with the Civilian Conservation Corps, a depression area program in America, and I wrote long chapters about each of these things and other things, which the very first thing my developmental editor did was cut them. So I can only say that I pleaded with her and I capsulized them. So instead of 35 pages, they're a page and a half at the end of each chapter. But I did a lot of reading. I'm a reader by nature, and I did a wide variety of reading. So, for example, I read a book about ENSA, the British USO. I read a couple of books written by German authors about the German experience in the ETO. I read a lot about vaudeville. I read a lot about Hollywood at the time. Mickey Rooney wrote 2 autobiographies. I read both of them up to 1946. I suppose I'll have to go back if I write a sequel and read the rest of them. He does, by the way, in his autobiography, name check Jim Hetzer, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. Yes, in a short sentence, he reminisces and names 2 or 3 of the entertainment specialists he worked with. So I also watched some films. Obviously, I watched films about the Battle of the Bulge. I watched, Saving Private Ryan for any people that have not been in combat, and certainly I have not. Although it is a movie and it's fabricated, it is, I thought, essential to understand how awful war is and just how terrible it is for combat soldiers. And I watched several times over Ken Burns, the American director, who's most famous, I think, for his Civil War documentary miniseries.
Yeah, I love
Ken
Civil War
Burns.
documentary.
Yes, it's absolutely brilliant. He did a miniseries on World War II called The War, and it's very much from the American. It's very much from the American.
Do you know what? I don't think I've ever seen that.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's absolutely epic. It's
oh my
truly
God, that's
one of the most
for how many episodes is that?
I'd say it's 8 or 9.
Yeah.
I've probably watched it 3 times. And interestingly, Gary, one of the things they do is look at the home front and 3 cities in America. One was Waterbury, Connecticut. My father, who served overseas in World War II, was from Waterbury, Connecticut.
Wow.
So I did that. I also watched, YouTube is amazing. I watched many U.S. Army training films from the time. So in the book, readers will find out that the protagonist, somewhat by accident, becomes qualified in the bazooka, the American rocket launcher, which he's not thrilled about. And then he spends the rest of the book looking down at his feet when people are asking, who's ready to take this bazooka. But I watched it. There were a couple of very useful training films the Army put out about, how to fire the bazooka and basic trade. So I watched a lot of film, both documentary, historical films, and then many movies. Read a lot of books, read magazines from the time. The American Army had a publication called Stars and Stripes, which was essentially a newspaper.
Yeah.
And then they had a magazine called Yank, the title for meaning to a Brit. And so I read some of those.
Did you travel to the Ardennes?
I did. My oldest son and I went in December of 2019. We hired a very knowledgeable Belgian guide. And one of the things that was really good about it in retrospect, it was incredibly cold while we were there, which of course, during the Battle of the Bulge, after about, I guess, the 3rd day or so, it became incredibly cold. So as we're standing, in fact, in the village of Hosingen in Luxembourg, which is where a couple of the chapters are set, And we can literally, my son and I literally walk down a forest path to the German border, which is a brook, a stream you could walk across without getting water past your ankles. Then when I was writing those chapters about the initial German attack on December 16th, 1944, I had in my mind exactly what that terrain looked like because I had walked down it.
Yeah, it's not very similar to the terrain in the Battle of the Bulge, which was mainly filmed in Spain. The big budget movie of 1964, I think it was shot. And they shoot a bit of it in some woods with some snow, and then you've got that line. The warm front's moving in. Suddenly, all the snow disappears, and so do all the hills and mountains with it.
Oh my goodness! And Lance, you're a tank. You're interested in tanks.
Sure.
Where they filmed in Spain was brilliant tank country. The Ardennes is awful tank
country.
I
mean, it's the roads are extremely narrow.
Impossible.
You can't go off the road. You can't go off. You're especially, of course not in a Tiger. It's way too heavy. But even in, the regular tank, you can't go off the road. A lot of the roads you end up taking are essentially logging trails.
Yeah.
Which makes ambush, very simple for the opposing side. So yes, that was an outrage that they filmed that in Spain.
Yeah, it was. It was a very different environment. A friend of mine made a movie called Midnight Clear. I don't know if you ever saw that.
I love that. I just watched that movie again. It is
such a good film, right?
And Gary
Sinise is in it.
Thank you. Gary Sinise, who is very involved with U.S. veterans now. That was one of his earliest roles, and it's just so amazing to see him in that movie.
It was directed by my friend Keith Gordon, who also adapted the screenplay from the book. And it was all filmed in the mountains of Colorado during the winter time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, and the actors were wearing scuba diving gear under their combat fatigues because it was so cold. That was how they kept them warm.
Wow!
And I think a couple of them tried a couple of days. Oh no, I'm going to do it how the soldiers really did it. And then after 2 days of that, they were like, "Yeah, I think I'll have my scuba costume back, please."
Whereas in Band of Brothers, when we shot all of the Battle of the Bulge stuff there, it was incredibly hot. We actually had the hottest October for many years. So hot, in fact, that many of us were getting sunburned whilst we were waiting to shoot. So
you had all those snow machines, didn't you? And
we had. So we had apparently it was £1 million worth of snow that we had sort of covering the area. So.
Well, Gary, you probably know then, because of that work, that the American Army did a very poor job of getting its soldiers ready for winter of 1944, even though they had the experience in Italy the previous winter.
Of course,
They thought it was just bureaucratic stupidity. They thought the war was going to be over, before Christmas, whatever. So as you well know, and as Band of Brothers shows, these American soldiers were not properly clad, and their boots were even worse than their outer clothing. So it was an absolute. So talk about morale problems.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the boots, because it was the one thing that I one of the only minor niggles that I had with the whole boot situation whilst we were shooting, because so many of the soldiers had actually wrapped their boots in burlap.
Right.
And we had none of that. So we were just in our boots. And so I was kind of thinking, it would have been a little bit more accurate if we'd had burlap wraps all around their boots,
At least they had, I think some of the actors wrapped their heads in a towel. I think I remember.
We had a lot of that.
Which was at least suggested to us viewers the discomfort and the lengths to which soldiers had to, they had to grab anything. Bed sheets, women's clothing, whatever.
Absolutely.
So Robert, having done extensive research, films, movies, books, etc. As an author, how did you approach plotting this, what was the prep work that you did before you actually got on the computer and started writing chapter 1 or whichever chapter you did? Because I find the prep work is so important, and the more of that you do, the less, once you hit the computer, you can type as fast as you can type and get going if you've done all the preparation correctly.
Yes, which first of all, I would like to say, and I think you both know this, if you have a certain kind of mindset, research is fun and writing is hard. So, at some point I had to just stop and discipline myself. What I did was I laid out the chapters in my mind. So there was going to be chapter 1 was going to be, and of course, a fundamental piece of advice for writers of fiction, at least, is start in the middle. Start in the middle of the action. So chapter 1 is at boot camp with Jim Tanzer. And then chapter 2 was this, as we were laughing about earlier, this very long chapter about a vaudeville show from 1927. And then chapter 3 was in England on the way to the war, chapter 4. So I laid out 20 chapters or 21 chapters. And I moved them around a little, but it's interesting, at least to me, I pretty much ended up exactly with those chapters. I definitely, moved a couple around and probably got rid of one, or one ended up to be 2 chapters. But I had those chapters in my mind, and then I just set out, starting with chapter 1 and, ending with chapter 21. And of course, as you both know, the first draft, which I call a 0 draft, is absolutely unreadable to anybody but me.
Sure.
It's not stream of consciousness quite, but I'm just trying to get thoughts down. And I'm, also writing notes to myself, this is terrible. What you just wrote is terrible. Start over on that. And, I wrote, I think, 7 drafts along that way, getting a little tighter each time before I gave it to the developmental editor. So Lance, when it was time to get disciplined and start writing, I didn't have a very hard time with what would be in each chapter.
So would you say that, considering that you did visit the Ardennes, would you say that was an essential part of your research for this? Would you say that you would not have been able to have completed this in its current form without that visit to the Ardennes?
I wouldn't have been able. It wouldn't be as good, because for many of my readers have said the best chapter in the book is about the morning of December 16th, 1944. And they have told me the best moment of that chapter is when Jim Tanzer, the entertainment soldier, who is up in a water tower at Hosingen due to several accidents in a row, he's looking out and he sees what he thinks are sort of squiggly lines. And then he realizes it is Germans advancing up the hill towards them wearing winter white outer clothing. So I had to see that water tower. I had to stand in Hosingen and look down that hill for it to be in my mind to write about it. So yes, Gary, I would say it is essential. I would have done something, but it wouldn't have been as authentic. And when you're writing historical fiction, you're writing for people that know history. At least when 20th century, and they won't put up with misinformation. If you don't have, if you don't get the big things right, they'll just stop reading.
Absolutely correct. Can I ask you about? Are you a PC or are you a Mac guy?
I am a PC guy.
So, what software do you use for formatting your book? Do you just write it out on Word and then upload it to Amazon, or have you got something that formats and shapes it all?
No, for you? I have an advertising agency background,
Yeah,
And
sure.
one of the things I learned is I leave production related things to experts. So I did not take and I know there are many very good programs, or at least adequate programs for formatting books. I never gave it a second thought. I called Keith Snyder, who did my first book, and had Keith, and that's how he makes his living, is doing book interiors. And so, for example, I really love the treatment he did where you see the chapter 4 Paris, France in the typewriter type from 1944. And that's just something that you have to be an artist to even think of.
I absolutely love that. I think it's great.
Beautiful.
If I was going to write a World War II historical fiction book, and I've thought about it many, many times, I'm sure I'm going to do something set in Market Garden at some point.
Yes, yeah.
It would, my chapters would definitely have that same kind of heading. 100% certain.
So it's a lovely aesthetic, isn't it? It really does kind of. It's quite immersive as well. It sort of, draws you in even more.
Yeah. And I read so much correspondence. I read so many memos. The U.S. Army it sent so many memos around, virtually from the front lines.
Yeah.
And of course, they were using portable typewriters. So I read many, many contemporaneous memos, and I just got so used to that typeface.
Yeah. There was a letter here that I wanted to ask you about. I'm not sure if it's this one, that dear Norma. I don't think it was this one, because you referred in your research to the letters that the daughter told you about.
Yes.
That were written to the mum, and I'm sure I saw one of them reproduced in the book. Now I'm struggling to find it, but I wondered if you took any of those and used them as kind of partial bones for the narrative, so to speak.
Reading the letters that he sent back were absolutely crucial to the bones of the story and even some chapters. I did not take anything verbatim from it, but the letters that Jim writes home and the letters that are in the book are really products of my imagination, but they are informed by not only the letters that Jim Hetzer, the real person, wrote home, but I read hundreds and hundreds of other letters by other American soldiers writing home. So they were kind of a mix in my imagination. And then I wanted to show, and I think the British soldiers had this issue too, when you're writing a letter home from a war zone, some officer is going to read it before it goes in the mail, and he's going to censor, if he's doing his job, he's going to censor anything in there that might, be too much information to be giving. So in fact, there's in Paris, Jim finds a suspicious character who offers to mail letters for him through the Paris post office, and thus they would not be censored. So there's one letter that's censored, and I think there's another one he writes home that's not censored.
That's interesting. So in essence, the letters really, from your research, they have the real essence and flavor of the original letters. They're kind of an amalgam of.
Yes, absolutely. And as you both know, as you know from studying history, mail, when you are in the service, especially overseas, and then especially isolated, in a combat role or guarding an oil field, mail is absolutely worth its weight in gold. Mail from home. And Gary, you talked about those connecting threads.
Yeah.
Mail from home is an absolutely essential connecting thread. So I really wanted to include letters in the book, and they were the product of reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters, which are absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's impossible really to overstress the importance of something like the mail, and indeed the entertainment, those crucial links with home.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Because obviously home is their goal.
Did you see the recent movie about the 688, the African American unit that had to sort out all the mail?
I have not. I have not seen that. I certainly will see it. I have not seen it. I do, I do understand, and it tried to put in the book the role, that the what were then called Negro soldiers. We now, call them black people. The truncated role that the black soldiers were put in the American Army. And so, yes, I do want to see that film. I have not seen it yet, but I fully appreciate, from having done my research, what the male meant to soldiers.
Yeah.
One of the interviews on my channel is with one of the leading actresses from that film. So Milana Jackson, you might find that interesting because we did talk about the film in some detail.
Good. I'll watch it.
Yeah, because most of it was filmed in the UK, I think. And she had a great time working on that movie. I mean, we need more Band of Brothers shows. In my opinion, it would be great if this book got adapted into a film, because I think that the topic of itself, I mean, this is a great story. You could do the Mickey Rooney story in a way,
Right.
or Don Knotts, or any one of those. One of the things I really liked about the book, because I did read most of the first 4 chapters, and was your attention to detail with some of the world building. One of the things that you mentioned was the 1943 Pan Am air crash with a load of USO people on, and there were 29 of them on board. Only 15 of them survived when the wing, the tip of the wing, when it was coming into land, it caught the surface of the water, and the whole plane tips upside down. Jane Froman was on board that plane, who's on visuals now. What's really interesting about me researching that story as a result of reading your book, there's a great story about how she and the famous gypsy lady, you mentioned her in your book.
Gypsy Markov, the genius accordion player.
They took Pan Am to court and they sued them with this lawyer who became very famous for defending people from, train crashes, plane crashes, and so on. And I was reading through that story and I was thinking, my God, this is another movie or TV show here. That's kind of 4 from Robert's book alone,
One thing you're touching on is that there's an undercurrent throughout the whole book, which I if there was someone to adapt it, they would have to decide what to do it. But the book is about show business.
Yeah, exactly.
And to some extent, in the big picture, war, as horrible as it is kind of show business. And certainly, the book covers Mickey Rooney, and the book covers some vaudeville, and the book covers some preaching, but a common thread running under all this is, it's quite a show. It's quite a show.
I think, the book is currently available to order on Amazon, both, of course, Amazon.com and Amazon.co.uk. Again, I'll just remind people watching, because we've had this before. If you are in America, don't order it on the .co.uk link, because it might take about 6 weeks to arrive, and vice versa. If you are in the UK or Europe, don't order it on the Amazon.com link. It will probably take even longer to arrive, as has happened with people in the past. One friend of mine just got a copy of my book today. I mean, it's quite, when you're self-publishing, you're a small fish in a big pond with some pretty big sharks in it. But I'm very pleased to see that your book is not only trending at 4.5 stars out of 5, which is very respectable, but you've also got 101 reviews on there. Again, most of them 4 or 5 stars. You're also trending at 4.1 on 4.4, sorry, on Goodreads. You've got to be pretty happy with that. I mean, as you say, you've got a background in marketing. I can see that it's it's paid off here. You know, and if we have a look at the reviews, there's some incredibly positive and you know, well written. You can always tell when a review is genuine, and it's great when people have taken the time to, you know, write a pretty long and significant review about your book. Nothing warms my heart more when I see one of those on one of my own books.
Yeah.
I mean, before we begin to wrap up, I would like to hear your approach to marketing this yourself, because I've had quite a few authors on here writing their first book for the first time. And, you know, as we often say, there's not a team of 5 guys in another room working 24 hours marketing your book. If only that were true. So what does the team of Robert O'Connor, single man working in one room in front of a TV screen, do to market his book and bring it to the attention of people?
Well, the most important thing, and this is just general marketing advice, you know, it was my trade for many years.
Yeah.
Is you've got to focus very sharply on just your top 1 or 2 priorities. So and the top 1 or 2 priorities for any book, especially a novel, is Amazon, because Amazon sells, you know, whether you like it or not, Amazon sells 65% of every book sold in America. And it's probably right up there for Europe. And then if you're talking about an ebook, Amazon sells 75%. So you've got the world's biggest bookstore.
Wow.
So, and the other thing, again, where you can be an equal to anybody is your website. So I focused very heavily on Amazon and my Amazon page, and I sent out many review copies. I contacted people first, and many didn't respond, but the people that responded, I sent out hundreds of review copies, and I followed up. Again, this is my marketing and sales background, but when I sent somebody a copy, I followed up to make sure they got it, and then I'd follow up 3 weeks later to see how they were doing, and many dropped out. So focused on that, and then focused on the website, and in fact, so that's the success I've had. I will tell your readers who are authors that what I have found is podcasts, while they're very, very enjoyable to do if you have knowledgeable hosts, as Lance, you and Gary are.
You're very kind.
They don't sell books. So I've done. I've been able to reach out and get on many podcasts, as I say, a few very high quality like this one. But I do it more for the experience and to reach, a few interested people. I really recommend to anybody who is doing their own marketing that I would focus on Amazon, and I would focus on the website. And then when those are done, if you haven't, time and energy left over, you should be working on your next book. But the other thing to do is reach out to influencers in your category. So Dale Dye, after seeing a couple of your podcasts, I'm certainly going to reach out to Dale Dye and see if I can get through to him and send him a copy.
I would definitely send him a copy. I think he would be very interested. I think
he would be very interested.
Oh,
yeah. I think you could send him a copy care of his reenactment company.
His company, Warriors Inc.
Warriors Inc.
I'll do that.
If you Google Warriors Inc.
Yep.
I think I may have the address actually for Warriors Inc., which I can pass.
Yeah,
on.
we can probably get you that, Robert. But I mean, I think Warriors Inc. has got a website, so it's warriors.inc.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there is a contact address on there. But if there isn't, we can get that for you.
Gary, what was he like to work with?
Unbelievably fantastic. I cannot tell you. What a man. I mean, just a really unique human being. I thought he was He was harsh but fair, very, 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 very generous with his praise, very scathing with his criticism. However, the television series of Band of Brothers would never have been made without Captain Dale Dye. 100% would never.
It certainly wouldn't be to the standard that it is without
Not,
him.
not a chance of it. I mean,
Yeah.
and his knowledge of military history is second to none that I know of, to be honest. I mean, he knows as much about any conflict anywhere in the world at any given time, more than any other person that I have ever come across.
Wow.
He's incredible, an incredible human being.
Yeah,
And he's a Marine.
And
on
he's a
top of all
Marine.
that.
He
He's
is.
a Marine. Yeah.
I don't know if you watched the whole interview. I think we had him on for nearly 90 minutes. And there's a really quite emotional bit towards the end where I was just wrapping up and Gary said, "Do you mind if I say something?" And you did that little speech to him about what Band of Brothers meant to you and also the other people that were the key background units. There were two big background units, red and blue team.
Yeah.
And you guys worked on that show, I think, for the best part of 18 months in two or three big stints.
Wow.
And it was a massive thing for the lives of those guys, not just the big actors that went on to bigger things and the Rosses of this world and whatnot, but you know, and the people that played the big characters. There were a huge number of English actors on that show, some of whom just had a couple of lines here and there, and a lot of them are still running their own podcasts. And you know, I've seen quite a lot of them, and they're saying, "God, did you think we would be talking about our involvement in this show?
Yeah.
You know, 20 something years on?
Yeah.
No way." And here we are. It's still the most important thing in my life I've ever done.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, gentlemen, you know, if God loves you, God lets you be involved with a project like that, which is an important project, working with incredibly skilled people. You're doing your absolute best. You know, this is to be treasured and never forgotten.
It's amazing, as Lance said. I mean, we were shooting this 25 years ago now. And I mean, 25 years ago, and it's as popular now as it was when it was first released. It's still the biggest selling DVD box set of all time.
Good Lord.
And it's something that, I mean, I still am in contact with so many friends from this show, and we've kind of become lifelong buddies really through the show. It was the most incredible experience of my life, and it's one of those things that if ever you say that you worked on Band of Brothers, you know, people's ears prick up and their eyes light up, and you know, everybody is so interested in wanting to know about Band of Brothers and what it was really like there, you know. But I think you know we have to sometimes we have to kind of rein ourselves in a little bit and remember that we were there doing this to honor the men who did this for real. And you know, and us and them, it's incomparable. You know, so these are the men that, you know, so we did something very minor to at least show our respect and gratitude to those incredible young boys, young men that fought so hardly for our freedom.
You know, I wrote one of the things that got edited out of my book, and I'm kind of heartbroken about it, but there's a character in the book called the war correspondent. And sometimes, as you know, you create a character so he can explain things to your main character so that your readers get the big picture. And so I had this war correspondent explaining to Jim Tanzer about the big strategy at Bastogne and, you know, what was going on, the big picture. I ended the book with a column that the war correspondent wrote looking back on the war in 1946. And my editor made me take it out. So it's on the website, but along the lines of what you're talking about, honoring the men and the boys and their sacrifice, I wanted to read, if you don't mind, a few sentences. He ends the column kind of in a tribute to the American Army.
No, please.
Thank you.
Be our guest.
Thanks. This is the end of his column. The American Army was larger than the nation's other military services combined. Unlike the Navy and the Marine and its Marine Corps, the Army had to rely on the draft to fill its ranks. If the other services were to some extent cherry-picked from American society, the Army was America itself, a cross-section of all the nation's geographic, religious, economic, and ethnic groups, including Catholics, Protestants, and Jews, also known as the three fighting faiths. In service of victory, America invented both the atom bomb and the idea of a Judeo-Christian nation. The Army drafted Americans from the economically backward South to the bustling industrial cities of the Midwest, from the fisheries of Maine to the timber country of the Pacific Northwest, from Wyoming ranches to the garment factories of New York, from North Dakota wheat fields to the Mississippi cotton fields. The Army drafted PhDs. The Army drafted immigrants who it had to teach to read and write the language of the country they served. It had to be this way, given the manpower needed for fighting a world war on two fronts. It was also fitting, given the ideals America said it was fighting for. America fielded millions of citizen soldiers who disliked the goddamn Army, were ambivalent about their officers, and resisted the trappings of military hierarchy, also known as chicken shit. Yet many of them will remember their service as the ennobling experience of their lives. If you ask them, they will tell you they fought not for their country or for lofty ideals, but for each other, for their buddies, to get the job done and get home.
That's beautiful.
Fab stuff.
And Band of Brothers, I probably wrote that inspired by some of those scenes of Band of Brothers, where it is clear that's what's keeping them going is each other.
A point
that's wonderful.
Made in the show many times. Let me read out this super chat real quick from Darth Plato, who's a big history guy actually, and has appeared on our channel a few times. World War II isn't my thing. I'm not sure that's true, Darth. I've talked to you about World War II many times, and you're interested in it for sure. World War II isn't my thing, he lies. I admit. But I did have an uncle at the Bulge. I know he served in supply, but whatever he experienced inflicted him with PTSD. Yeah, my grandfather served in World War I. In fact, I used to have a set of black and white stills of his unit posing for photographs. I don't know what happened to them. So annoyed that they've disappeared. And I found those in a drawer. And that was when I first showed my grandfather those pictures. Now, when you never said that you served in the army in World War I, you said you're an air raid warden in World War II, which he was. And the reason he didn't get called up for World War II was because he had shell shock, which is what they called PTSD back then.
Yeah.
And he never told me, not even after I got that out of him, he never told me a single story about World War I. He did not want to talk about it at all. You know, not even. I didn't even get the words out of him. It was horrible. He did mention something about mustard gas once. Yeah. So I have a feeling that him and his unit might have been gassed. Because he did. I think I asked him about, is that when they use mustard gas? And I think he did say something about mustard gas in response to a question, but that was the only thing I ever got out of him. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, you know, they don't really like talking about it. I mean, that's
the reality of it, isn't it? Really, I think, you know, it's only really in recent years, I suppose, in the past couple of decades that we really have these testimonies from these incredible young men, you know, like the beginning of each episode of Band of Brothers, you know, those wonderful testimonies, you know, this harrowing and heartfelt and heartbreaking testimonies from these gentlemen who did so much for us. But it took so long for them to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And that's
okay, we're going to start wrapping things up. We've gone over time a little bit. Just to remind people that Robert's book, which is available widely on Amazon worldwide. Talks about the narrative from a sort of semi-fictional character who's serving in an entertainment unit, also known as a Jeep show, on the battlefront in World War II, Western Front, 1944. The likes of people like Mickey Rooney, who appeared in that unit for real. Here he is in 1939 with Judy Garland. Amazing picture, this, when you think about it. Yeah, I mean, basically, you're going to read about Mickey Rooney in the book, and some of the other people like Don Knotts, who also fought in those units. There's a picture of him here. Remarkable, similar looking to the Inside Man, in case you're wondering what he looks like.
It's not that dissimilar, to be.
No, mate. If he took the hat off and he was completely bald, I think that'd be bang on. I've got another. Darth has said, "It's true, I assure you. The exception is naval stuff from Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor was my first serious research project. I researched naval stuff now because of my book, which is ironic because I interned for the army." Okay, well, just Pearl Harbor then. I'm pretty sure that took place in World War II. So Darth attempting to still convince us he's not interested in history.
Right. We know he loves history. He is a huge history man.
So, Robert, now you've done this one, are you gonna do anything else, sort of historical fiction? What's up next for you? What are you working on at the moment?
I am just starting on a sequel, and I'm probably going to send Jim Tanzer to college in America on the GI Bill. Your British listeners may or may not know about the GI Bill, but basically,
I'm fully aware of it.
Yeah. It changed. It sent probably 7 or 8 million American men who would not have gone to college without the GI Bill, and my father was one of them. It sent them to college basically for free, and changed American society fundamentally. So I think I want to send him, even though he's pretty old, he's got a wife and a kid. He wouldn't be the only, there's plenty of soldiers that did that. So I think I want to send him to college, maybe Yale or Harvard, just for the fun of it on the GI Bill, because he would not fit in. And then there was of course, the Korean War from 1950 to 1952, and the occupation of Japan, and perhaps he is involved with entertaining troops in the Korean War and in occupied Japan. So I will try this time not to over-research it and write massive chapters that my development editor just cuts entirely. But that's what I'm thinking, gentlemen.
I think it's fair to say that, this is an incredibly unique story. I don't know. I mean, I've read an awful lot of World War II fiction, and obviously history books particularly on the Bulge, and I don't know of anything like this. This is completely unique. So I would urge anybody who has any interest in history whatsoever, let alone an interest in history of World War II or the American Armed Forces, this is a unique piece of work, and I think it really does deserve to be picked up and read and enjoyed.
You're very gracious, Gary. Thank you. I can assure you it was the best I could do.
And if anyone's wondering if any of it does take place in Bastogne, possibly the answer is yes. I'm not going to give away too much, but I don't often get a chance to read the books when authors come on, and I'm all about supporting independent creators, be they authors or whichever branch of the creative arts. But I was glad that I got to read some of this one, because what I read of it, I really enjoyed. And certainly if you're over in the UK, let me know, because then I'll order a physical copy of the book so you can sign it for me.
I'll bring it with me.
Fantastic. Well, look, Robert, it's been fantastic having you on. I say this to all my guests. You're now an official member of the Outcast Creative, as in you're an independent creative that's doing this on your own. Therefore, this channel is now, you've given us your time. You've supported my channel by coming on here, by virtue of us also supporting you. It's a It's a symbiotic relationship going forward. But that means this channel is available to you for promoting your work in future. So when you've got the next book, come back on, and we'll have you back on, and we'll talk about that one. And you know, the channel's only going to get bigger, so our contribution towards your marketing should only grow and grow and grow.
Well, we're buddies now. That's
fantastic, and I may well lean on you for some marketing advice. That down the road. Now that I know that's the extent of your background, although I did read about that on your website. To be fair, so okay, brilliant. Well, look, that's going to be it from us today. Thanks so much for my guest co-host, the Inside Man, for coming on and lending his World War II ears, so to speak, to this stream. We are going to be back on Sunday, where we've got an episode of Chew the Fat scheduled. Now, I need to put a proviso on that, which is that we are in pre-production for a little film at the minute. Sadly, not one set during World War II, although I have been trying to make one like that for ages. It is possible that I might have to do some film recceing on Sunday because we've had a bit of trouble with a location. However, assuming that doesn't clash with anything, we should be back on Sunday at 8 o'clock, where we're going to do a special Chew the Fat episode of our top 5 movies set on board trains. So films that are set predominantly on board a train. We just did a massive chat about the film Cassandra Crossing the other night on the channel. You can see that on the last episode of the Nielsen Ratings, our weekly review show, every 10 o'clock UK time GMT. But on Sunday at 8 p.m. GMT, we'll be looking to get into some other films like Narrow Margin and The Silver Streak, Runaway Train, things
Von
like
Ryan's
that.
Express.
Yeah, I've got a panel of guests coming on to pick their top 5 train movies. If you had to pick a top train movie that would be in your top 5, Robert, have you got one that comes to mind?
The Taking of Pelham 1.
Oh,
that's
yes!
Mate, that's on my list.
Yeah,
that's on my list.
That one is chilling.
It's just amazing.
Plato says, "Is there a World War II train?" I can think of 3.
Von Ryan's Express. For
Von Ryan's Express. There's The Train, which is an absolutely brilliant film, and then you could argue the first version of the Tarantino remade movie, the original version of what was it called, Inglourious Basterds. Quite a big proportion of that is either set in train stations or on a train.
Yeah. It's funny. I think the Italian translation of the English translation of the Italian title is actually That Damned Train.
Yeah, that's a terrible title
in English.
Yeah, indeed. Well, that's it from us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Tell fellow creatives about the channel. If you know an independent creative who's got a book, film, a play, a piece of music, anything that's got a creative bent to it, as long as there's something that we can see and we can discuss and we can talk about, we're always interested in getting those people on and supporting and talking to them, just like we've done with Robert today. So all that remains to be said is don't forget to keep in touch with the people that you care about. Tell them that you love them. That means that it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Indeed.
Find a hidden gem today.